I married a ghost of a woman. I didn't realize it until the morning she threw my life into the hallway like yesterday's trash. When I stood at the altar at 62 years old, I thought I was closing a chapter of grief and opening a book of grace. I didn't tell my new wife, Elena, or her two grown sons that the sprawling brick complex we called home wasn't just my place of work. It was my kingdom. To them, I was Arthur Sterling, the tired building manager who fixed leaky faucets and chased away vagrants. I let them believe that lie because I wanted to be loved for the man I was, not the balance in my bank account. But the morning after the wedding, before the honeymoon champagne had even gone flat, Elena showed me exactly who she was. She threw my suitcases into the corridor and told me she'd married a provider, not a charity case. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Little did she know, she had just evicted the man who owned the very floor she was standing on. Stay with me until the end of this story to see how a man who has lost everything finds the strength to take it all back. And please, comment the city or country you're watching from. I love seeing how far these lessons of the heart can travel. My name is Arthur Sterling. Until 3 years ago, my life was a masterpiece of shared silence and comfortable routines with my first wife, Clara. When she passed, the silence became a vacuum. I moved into apartment 1A of Sterling Manor Heights, a property I had spent 30 years building from the ground up. I told the tenants I was the new live-in manager. It was easier that way. It kept me busy. It gave me a reason to wake up. Then came Elena Vance. She was 51, with auburn hair and a way of looking at you that made you feel like the only person in the room. She moved into apartment 4C with her two sons, Julian, 25, and Leo, 23. She told me she was a struggling widow, working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I watched her struggle for 2 years. I fell for the way she seemed to carry the weight of the world with a smile. I gave her breaks on the rent, telling her the owner was a soft-hearted man who lived in Europe. I was actually giving myself a pay cut just to see her stress melt away. Our wedding was a small affair held in the building's courtyard, right next to the fountain I had installed in Claire's memory. Elena looked like an angel in ivory lace. Julian and Leo stood by her side, looking like 2 pillars of a new family. When the minister asked if I took her to be my wedded wife, I said I do, with a conviction that shook my very soul. I thought I had found a second chance. The reception was hosted in the community room. Our neighbors, people I had known for decades, brought potluck dishes. Mrs. Gable brought her famous cherry pie. Mr. Henderson played his violin. It was perfect. That night, as we moved the last of her things in my unit, Elena talked about our future. She spoke about knocking down walls, buying Italian leather sofas, and how Julian and Leo needed more space to find themselves. I laughed and kissed her forehead, telling her we had all the time in the world. I woke up that Sunday morning to the smell of expensive French roast coffee. For 5 minutes, I was the happiest man on earth. I walked into the kitchen in my bathrobe, expecting a kiss. Instead, I found a firing squad. Elena was sitting at the table, her hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Julian was leaning against the refrigerator, arms crossed. Leo was already in my bedroom, and I could hear the sound of drawers being slammed shut. "Good morning, beautiful," I said, reaching for a mug. Elena didn't move. "Sit down, Arthur. We need to have a professional conversation." The word professional chilled me. Is something wrong with the plumbing? I can fix it after breakfast. The only thing that needs fixing is our living arrangement, she said. Her voice was like a razor. "Julian, bring the bags." Julian walked out of my bedroom, carrying 2 large suitcases. "My suitcases? What is this, Elena?" "A joke." I tried to laugh, but my throat was dry. "This apartment is too small for 4 people, she said, tapping her manicured nails on the table. "And since you're just the building manager, I'm sure you have access to that little studio in the basement, the one near the boiler room." I stared at her. "You're kicking me out? We were married yesterday. This is my home." "It was your home," she corrected. "But now we are a family of 4, and you are a man with a maintenance salary and no ambition. My sons need stability. They need a base of operations. You can continue to manage the building from the basement." It'll be more efficient for your work anyway. This is illegal, Elena. You can't just. I'm your wife, Arthur, she snapped, and for the first time, I saw the mask slip. The warmth in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating greed. I have every right to this space. If you cause a scene, I'll tell the board of directors, or whoever that mysterious owner is, that you've been harassing the female tenants. Who do you think they'll believe? A hardworking mother or a lonely old man with a grudge? Leo stepped forward and grabbed my arm. He wasn't gentle. He led me to the door. Julian threw my suitcases out into the hallway. The thud they made against the carpet sounded like a coffin closing. Don't make this difficult, Arthur, Julian sneered. Go down to the basement and do your job. Maybe we'll call you if the toilet clogs. The door slammed shut. I stood in the hallway of the building I designed, the building I owned in full, holding a suitcase full of mismatched socks and old sweaters. Mrs. Gable from apartment 2B stepped out to put out her recycling. She saw me standing there, trembling. Arthur, is everything all right? I thought you were on your honeymoon. Just a change of plans, Martha, I whispered. Just a change of plans. I walked to the elevator. Every floor I passed represented a piece of my life. I had worked 40 years in high-end construction and property development to afford this. I had lived frugally, driving a 15-year-old truck and wearing clothes from the local department store because I didn't need the flash. I wanted the peace. I went down to the basement emergency unit. It was a cold, windowless box with a single cot and a desk. I sat on that cot for 3 hours, staring at the gray concrete walls. My heart felt like it had been put through a wood chipper. How could I have been so blind? I had looked at her struggle and seen strength, but it was all an act. She had been hunting, and I was the trophy. But as the shock began to fade, a new heat started to rise in my chest. It was the heat of a man who had built skyscrapers from nothing. Elena thought she had married a servant. She was about to find out she had married the master of the house. I opened my laptop. My hands were steady now. I didn't go to a divorce site. I went to my private server, the one that held the deeds, the tax records, and the internal surveillance logs for Sterling Manor Heights. Sometimes people show you exactly who they are. Arthur, Clara used to say. The trick is to believe them the first time. I believed her now, and I was going to make sure Elena Vance remembered the name Sterling for the rest of her life. The basement of Sterling Manor Heights was never meant to be a dwelling for the living. It was a subterranean labyrinth of humming pipes, the rhythmic, bone-deep thumping of industrial laundry machines, and the oppressive heat of the main boiler. But as I sat at that small, scratched wooden desk, surrounded by the stale scent of old dust and damp concrete, it became my sanctuary. It became my war room. I could feel the vibrations of the building above me, my building, and for the first time in 48 hours, I didn't feel like a victim. I didn't feel like a grieving widower who had been swindled by a pretty face. I felt like a predator who had been forced to play the prey for far too long, finally sharpening his claws in the dark. I started with the basics, moving with the methodical precision of a man who had spent 40 years in land development and high-stakes construction. I knew better than anyone that in this modern world, every person leaves a digital footprint, no matter how carefully they try to sweep the path behind them. For 2 years, Elena had played the role of the destitute, struggling mother with the skill of a Broadway veteran. She had fed me a steady diet of tragedy, stories of an ex-husband who was a phantom of malice, a man she claimed had gambled away their life savings, ignored their children, and left her with nothing but a mountain of crushing debt and 2 hungry sons. I had believed every word. I had believed her because I was lonely, yes, but also because I wanted to be her hero. I wanted to be the man who lifted the weight from her shoulders. I pulled up the paid subscription to a high-level background check service, a tool I usually reserved for vetting multi-million-dollar commercial tenants for my firm. My fingers were steady as I typed in her name, Elena Marie Vance, formerly Elena Thorne. I hit the enter key, and the silence of the basement seemed to grow heavier as the progress bar crawled across the screen. As the results populated, my breath hitched, and a cold, sharp pain bloomed in my chest. The woman she described, the one who supposedly worked double shifts at a greasy diner and pulled late nights at a retail store, simply did not exist. Elena hadn't been left with nothing. She had been left with a fortune. Her divorce settlement from 5 years ago wasn't a cautionary tale of debt. It was a blueprint for a calculated windfall. According to the court records, she had walked away with $450,000 in liquid cash and a guaranteed monthly alimony payment of $5,000. I felt a surge of physical nausea, a bitter taste rising in the back of my throat. $5,000 a month. That was more than most hardworking families in this city earned in an entire year. Yet she had sat in my office every month for 2 years, her eyes watery and her hands trembling, asking if she could pay her $1,200 rent in small installments. I had watched her calculate her grocery money on a napkin while I sat across from her, feeling my heart break. I had even waived her late fees. I had given her charity and grace while she was sitting on a mountain of hidden gold, laughing at me behind my back. I dug deeper into the property records of the surrounding 4 counties, my eyes scanning through deeds and tax assessments. I found it tucked away in a suburban annex, a deed for a luxury townhouse in Oak Ridge that she had sold just 480 hours before moving into my building. The sale price? $780,000. I leaned back, the cheap plastic chair creaking under my weight like a warning. Between the divorce cash, the alimony, and the house sale, Elena Vance was worth well over $1,200,000 in liquid assets alone. She wasn't a victim of a bad marriage. She was a professional at terminating them for profit. She hadn't moved into Sterling Manor Heights because she was desperate. She had moved in because she was hunting for a new, stable target with deep pockets. And she had found a simple building manager who looked like a soft, easy mark she could bleed dry. But as I scrolled further, the investigation took a darker, more technical turn. I began looking into her communications. Since I provided the high-speed fiber internet for the entire building as part of the manager's perk, I had legal, administrative access to the traffic logs of the building's main router. It was a security measure I'd installed years ago to protect my tenants from hackers. I noticed a massive, consistent stream of data being sent from apartment 4C to a specific IP address in Seattle, Washington. Thousands of encrypted messages and video calls occurring daily for the last year. A sudden, sharp knock on the basement door startled me so badly I nearly knocked the laptop off the desk. I closed the lid instinctively, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice sounding like gravel. "It's Leo," a muffled, uncertain voice replied from the other side of the heavy steel. I opened the door to find the younger son standing in the dim light of the hallway. He looked nothing like his brother, Julian. While Julian had inherited his mother's sharp, predatory eyes and her talent for the long con, Leo always seemed a bit lost, like a man forced to play a part in a Shakespearean tragedy he hadn't auditioned for. He looked around the cramped, windowless basement room, his eyes lingering on my wedding ring, the one Clara had given me 30 years ago, which I still hadn't found the strength to take off. "Arthur, I brought you some of your tea," he said, his voice barely a whisper as he handed me a stainless steel thermos. "Mom told us to throw all your kitchen stuff in the incinerator, but I hid this. I know you like the Earl Grey with the honey." "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice gruff with a sudden, unexpected emotion. "Why are you down here? If your mother or Julian find out you're talking to me, she'll have both our heads on a platter." Leo sat on the very edge of the narrow cot, his head hanging so low I could see the tension in his neck. "She's already changed the locks on the top and bottom deadbolts, Arthur. And she's upstairs right now on the phone with a lawyer. A woman named Patricia Valdez. Do you know her?" "I know the name," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "She's not a lawyer. She's a shark. She specializes in scorched earth divorces, taking men for every penny they have before they even realize they're in a fight." "That's exactly the plan," Leo whispered, looking up at me with an expression of pure exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore, Arthur. I can't sit upstairs and watch her and Julian celebrate while they do this to you. You were the only person in 5 years who actually treated us like human beings. To her, we're just tools, assets to be deployed." I sat down on the creaky chair, leaning toward him. "What do you mean, tools, Leo? Be honest with me." Leo looked toward the door, his eyes darting back and forth as if he expected Julian to burst through the wall. The whole thing, Arthur. Every bit of it was staged. The chance meeting at the park 2 years ago, she'd been tracking your schedule for weeks. She knew exactly who you were from the very start. She didn't think you were just a building manager. She did a deep dive and found out you were a developer with a massive hidden pension and secret holdings. She's been planning to upgrade the apartment and seize the building's management contract since the first month we moved in. She told me she loved me, Leo. I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth. We stood in front of a minister and 100 people yesterday. We made a covenant. She loves what you can provide, and she loves the power she thinks she has over you, Leo said bitterly. And she's not doing any of this for Julian or me. She's doing it for Marcus. The name hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, knocking the air from my lungs. Who is Marcus, Leo? Tell me the truth. He's her real boyfriend, Leo explained, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and suppressed rage. They've been together for nearly 14 months. He lives out west, in Seattle, but he's moving here next Friday. Mom told us that as soon as she gets you out of the apartment and gets the spousal rights and the temporary support settled, Marcus is moving into apartment 1A. She told Julian and me that we'd finally have a real father who has real power. I felt the room spinning, the gray concrete walls closing in on me. A year. She had been with this man for more than half the time we were supposedly building a life together. Every girl's night, she went on. Every weekend she supposedly spent visiting her sick aunt in the city. It was all a beautifully choreographed lie. Does Julian know the extent of this? I asked. Julian is her right hand, Leo said. He's helping her pack your remaining things into boxes for the Goodwill. He thinks Marcus is going to give him a high-level executive job in some tech company. But I've seen Marcus on the encrypted video calls, Arthur. He's not right. He doesn't look like a CEO. He looks like a thug who bought a custom suit. I think he's the one pushing her to be this aggressive. He told her over the weekend that if she didn't have you out of the building by Monday morning, he wouldn't come. He told her he doesn't share territory. I reached out and placed a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. Why are you telling me this now, son? You're betraying your mother. You're putting your own future at risk. Leo looked up at me, and I saw the glint of tears in his eyes. Because my father was a good man, Arthur. A real man. He didn't gamble our money away. My mother took it. She drained his life insurance and his retirement accounts while he was lying in the ICU, unable to speak. She told us he lost it so we wouldn't hate her for the poverty we lived in. I found the hidden bank statements in her jewelry box last year. I've been living a house of mirrors for 20 years, and I'm tired, Arthur. I'm just so tired of the lying. He stood up, wiping his face with the back of his hand. She's filing the emergency divorce papers at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. She's going to claim abandonment, unstable behavior, and emotional cruelty to get an immediate, temporary ruling on the apartment. She wants to make sure the police bar you from even stepping foot on the 4th floor by noon. She's moving with the speed of a military strike. I muttered, my mind already calculating the countermove. She has to, Leo said. Marcus's flight arrives on Friday. She needs the master bedroom empty and the manager title stripped from you before he lands. She wants to present him with the keys to the kingdom. After Leo slipped back out into the hallway, I didn't go back to the financial records or the bank settlements. I went to the heart of the building, the security system. I had high-definition, thermal-capable cameras hidden in the lobby, the elevators, the service corridors, and the back entrances. I began a grueling, frame-by-frame search of the last 6 months of footage. I found him. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a military-style buzz cut and a scarred leather jacket. He never once came through the front door. He always utilized the service entrance near the trash compactors, using a master key that Elena must have duplicated from my keyring while I was in the shower. I watched the time-stamped footage of him entering the building at 11:15 at night, precisely when I was asleep in apartment 1A. I watched him leave at 4:45 in the morning, slipping out into the shadows like a thief. In one particular shot from 3 weeks ago, the overhead LED light in the service hallway caught his face with terrifying clarity. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just a boyfriend or a tech mogul. He was a ghost I recognized from my days in large-scale construction development 20 years ago. His name wasn't Marcus. It was Vincent Vinny Scalise. He was a notorious small-time fixer and professional tenant intimidator who had been barred from every local union and blacklisted by every major developer for embezzlement, wire fraud, and witness intimidation. Elena thought she was the one running the con. She thought she was using me to secure a luxury life for her and her high society boyfriend. But as I looked at Scalise's predatory, mocking smirk on the high-def monitor, the irony hit me like a sledgehammer. She was being played just as hard as I was. Scalise didn't want a family or a real fatherhood role. He wanted a base of operations that couldn't be traced to him, and he wanted a woman who had $1 million in liquid cash he could drain. I closed the laptop and felt a strange, icy sense of calm settle over my bones. The betrayal was complete. The players were all on the board, and the pieces were moving. Elena had the aggressive lawyers, the manufactured lies, and the temporary legal right to my bed and my kitchen. She had the momentum, but I had the truth. I had the digital evidence. And more importantly than anything else, I had the deed to every single brick in this complex. I picked up the phone and dialed a private number I hadn't touched in nearly a decade. It was for a man who didn't deal in potluck dinners, building management, or mediation. He dealt in legal annihilation. "Hello, Silas?" I said when the deep, gravelly voice finally answered on the third ring. "It's Arthur Sterling. I have a redevelopment project that has been contaminated by a parasitic element. I need immediate, aggressive legal clearing. I need you to initiate the scorched earth protocol. Yes, everything. I want her to see the mountain she's trying to climb before I knock the entire thing over on top of her." I hung up the phone and looked at the thermos of tea Leo had brought me. I opened it and took a sip. It was cold now, bitter and sharp. 30 years of building this legacy, I whispered to the empty, echoing basement, and she thinks she can dismantle it in 30 minutes. I stood up and began to pack a small, rugged tactical bag. I wasn't packing to leave. I was packing to move. I wasn't going to hide in the shadows of the basement like a disgraced servant anymore. If Elena wanted to play the role of the owner's wife and the lady of the manor, I was going to give her the performance of a lifetime. I was going to let her feel the weight of the crown, let her enjoy the view from the top of the tower, right up until the moment I pulled the foundation out from under her feet. Tomorrow, Arthur, the building manager, would be dead and buried. Tomorrow, Arthur Sterling, the chairman and sole proprietor of Sterling Holdings, was coming home, and God help anyone standing in his way. The sound of a heavy, gloved fist pounding on a hollow metal door is a vibration that bypasses the ears and goes straight to the marrow of your bones. It is a sound you never forget, especially when it marks the moment your own creation is used as a weapon against you. It was exactly 6 o'clock on Monday morning when a local sheriff's deputy arrived at my cramped basement unit. The air down, there was still thick with the smell of the cold tea Leo had brought me, and the blue light of my laptop was the only thing illuminating the concrete walls. I opened the door to find Sergeant Miller. He looked at me with a mixture of genuine pity and the professional indifference of a man who had seen too many domestic tragedies. In his hand, he held a thick stack of papers bound by a stiff blue legal backing. "Arthur Sterling?" he asked. It was a formality. I had given this man coffee in the lobby a dozen times over the last decade while he waited for rainstorms to pass. He knew exactly who I was, or at least who he thought I was. "Yes, Sergeant," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I reached out and took the documents. The paper felt cold, almost oily in my hands. "You've been served with an emergency temporary restraining order, Arthur," he said, shifting the weight of his utility belt. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "The judge signed it just over an hour ago. You have exactly 60 minutes to vacate the premises of Sterling Manor Heights. The order states you are not to come within 500 feet of Elena Sterling, Julian Vance, or Leo Vance. You're also barred from the 4th floor and the management office entirely." I looked down at the filing. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. "Sergeant, I live here. My life's work is in these pipes and wires. I work here. I own. I bit back the word. Not yet. The trap wasn't fully set. If I reveal my hand to a deputy in a basement, Elena would have time to scramble. I'm truly sorry, Arthur, Miller said, and for a second, I saw the man behind the badge. But the filing is specific. It says you became belligerent, verbally abusive, and physically intimidating when she asked for space to adjust to the marriage. It claims you threatened to make them regret ever moving in. Based on the volatile environment described, the court granted the emergency petition. If you're still on this property by 701, I don't have a choice. I have to take you in. I looked past his shoulder. Standing at the very top of the basement stairs, framed by the light of the service corridor, was Julian. He wasn't even trying to hide. He was holding his smartphone up, the lens pointed directly at me, a smug, oily grin plastered across his face. He was recording the fall of the old man. He wanted a digital trophy of the moment I was cast out like a stray dog. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I simply turned back to the small wooden desk and began to pack. I closed my laptop, the one containing the digital blueprints of Elena's ruin. I gathered my legal folders and the small, silver-framed photo of Clara I kept by the cot. As I tucked the photo into my bag, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Sometimes the strongest structures have to be stripped to the studs before they can be rebuilt, Arthur, Clara used to say when I was stressed about a project. I walked past the deputy and up the stairs. I didn't look at Julian as I passed him, though I could hear his muffled chuckle. When I reached the lobby, the opulence of the space felt like an insult. Elena was standing there near the grand fireplace, draped in a heavy silk robe, the one I had bought her for her 51st birthday, paid for with the bonus I'd supposedly earned from the building owner. She was holding a steaming cup of tea, watching my exit with the detached curiosity of a queen watching a peasant being banished from the castle gates. "Don't worry about the building's upkeep, Arthur," she called out, her voice projecting across the marble lobby so the early morning tenants heading for the gym could hear. "I've already been in contact with a professional, high-end property management firm. They'll be taking over your duties immediately. I've explained the situation to them. Your services are no longer required by this family." I stopped at the heavy, hand-carved oak doors of the main entrance. I turned back to look at her one last time. Behind her, the fountain I'd built for Clara bubbled peacefully. "You're making a very expensive mistake, Elena," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of anger, which seemed to unnerve her more than a shout would have. "The only mistake I made was thinking a man with your lack of ambition was worth my time," she spat back, her eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp cruelty. "Now get out before the sergeant puts the cuffs on you in front of the neighbors." I stepped out into the crisp, biting morning air. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the brickwork of Sterling Manor in shades of bruised purple and orange. I didn't go to a cheap motel. I didn't wander the streets. I walked exactly 3 blocks to a quiet corner where a black, armored sedan was idling at the curb. The door opened, and I stepped into the climate-controlled silence of the back seat. Silas Thorne sat there, surrounded by glowing tablets and leather-bound folders. He was a man who didn't just practice law, he wielded it like a scalpel. His hourly rate was more than Elena's entire monthly alimony, and he was worth every cent. "You look like hell, Arthur," Silas said, handing me a crystal glass of water. "I feel like a man who just watched a ghost walk away with his house," I replied, taking a deep breath. "Is the perimeter secured? Did you get the filings ready?" "Better than ready," Silas smirked, tapping a folder. "While you were playing the part of the evicted manager, my team was at the courthouse. We've pulled the original incorporation papers for Sterling Holdings from 30 years ago. We have a tax trail, but the real checkmate is right here." He held up a copy of the lease modification documents Elena had signed so greedily on Friday. She thought she was signing a rent reduction for Julian and Leo. I muttered. She wasn't, Silas confirmed. She was signing a comprehensive prenuptial disclosure and a tenant-at-will agreement. It specifically stipulates that the property known as Sterling Manor Heights is an exempt premarital asset and that her residency is contingent upon the owner's discretion. By signing those, she legally acknowledged you as the sole proprietor, Even if she didn't realize the name, Arthur Sterling on the page was the same man fixing her sink. And what about the man she's bringing into my home? I asked, my jaw tightening. Silas flipped to a digital file. Vincent Scalise. We were in a deep background sweep through the federal database. He's got 3 active felony warrants in Washington state for identity theft, wire fraud, and grand larceny. He's not a tech mogul. Arthur. He's a professional drifter who targets wealthy women. He's been using Elena's credit card for the last 6 months to pay for his business, travel, and luxury hotels. He's not her partner. He's her parasite. I spent the next 4 hours in Silas's glass-walled office, watching the city wake up. We weren't just filing for a simple divorce. This was a total annulment based on premeditated, multi-layered fraud. But I didn't want a quiet settlement behind closed doors. I wanted her to see the walls of her own trap close in on her. At exactly noon, I returned to Sterling Manor Heights. But the man who stepped out of the black sedan was not the man who had been kicked out 6 hours earlier. I had stripped away the grease-stained work jacket and the heavy boots. I was wearing a charcoal, 3-piece Italian wool suit that had been custom-tailored for me years ago. I wore a silk tie the color of a winter sky and a pair of polished Oxfords that clicked with authority on the pavement. I wasn't carrying a heavy toolbox this time. I was carrying a slim, black leather briefcase containing the power of $7 million in assets. As I approached the 500-foot perimeter established by the restraining order, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an alert from the building's internal security system. Julian, ever the vigilant sentry for his mother's stolen kingdom, had spotted me on the external high-def cameras. He had called the police within seconds. By the time I reached the bottom of the grand front steps, 2 police cruisers had pulled up, their sirens silenced, but their lights throwing frantic splashes of red and blue against the brick. Elena, Julian, and Leo were standing on the porch, having rushed out to witness my arrest. Elena looked triumphant, her arms crossed, a mocking smile on her face. "There he is," she shouted to the officers, pointing a shaking finger at me. "He's violating the court order. He's right here. Arrest him immediately." The same sergeant from this morning, Miller, stepped out of his cruiser. He looked frustrated and genuinely disappointed. "Arthur, damn it. I told you this morning. You can't be here. Why are you making this so hard on yourself? I don't want to put you in a cell, but you're giving me no choice." I stood my ground, my posture perfectly erect, the sun reflecting off the silver at my temples. "Sergeant Miller," I said, my voice projected with the calm, echoing authority that comes from 30 years of commanding construction crews. "I'm not here as the building manager today. I'm not here to fix a boiler or paint a wall." Elena laughed, a shrill, mocking sound that echoed through the courtyard. "The landlord? He's finally snapped, officer. He's a maintenance man who's had a complete mental break because he couldn't handle the divorce. Just take him away." Silas Thorne stepped out of the sedan behind me, his presence alone enough to make the officers pause. He held up a gold-embossed legal folder like a shield. "Officers, stay your hand. My name is Silas Thorne, senior partner at Thorne & Associates, representing Sterling Holdings. If you check the master property deed currently on file with the city's land registry, you'll find that this entire complex, every brick, every unit, and the land beneath it, is owned by a single-member LLC. The sole 100% member of that LLC is the gentleman standing before you, Mr. Arthur Sterling." The sergeant blinked. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. Miller took the folder from Silas and began to read the documents. I watched his eyes move, scanning the deed, the corporate filings, and the tax records. His eyes went wide. He looked at the paperwork, then up at the massive building, then back at me. This can't be right," Elena stammered, the triumph in her voice being replaced by a thin, wavering thread of panic. Her face was turning a sickly shade of gray. He's just Arthur. He's the guy who fixes the heaters. He lives in a 1-bedroom unit with old furniture." "I am Arthur," I said, stepping forward. I ignored the 500 feet rule entirely because, as Silas had already prepared to argue, A restraining order based on fraudulent claims cannot be used to bar a property owner from his primary place of business during a title dispute. I looked directly into her eyes. But I'm also the man who paid for Julian's private tutoring when he failed his exams. I'm the man who waived your rent for 6 months when you lied to me about needing an expensive surgery. And I'm the man who owns the very bed you're planning to let Vincent Scalise sleep in this Friday. The name Vincent Scalise hit her with the force of a physical blow. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her hand began to shake so violently that she dropped the keys she had been clutching. "Who?" Julian asked, his smugness evaporating as he looked between his mother and me. "Who is Scalise?" "Mom, you said his name was Marcus. You said he was a CEO. "Marcus doesn't exist, Julian," I said, pitying the boy for a fleeting second. "The man your mother is bringing into this house is a wanted felon who is currently in the process of draining her secret bank accounts. And as for this apartment," I turned my attention back to Sergeant Miller. "Officer, I am not here to harass or intimidate. I am here to serve a lawful eviction notice. Since the marriage was entered into under documented fraudulent pretenses, including the concealment of significant assets and a pre-existing relationship, the marital status of this residence is legally null and void. Under the specific terms of the tenant-at-will agreement Elena signed on Friday, I am exercising my absolute right as the owner to terminate her residency effective immediately." "You can't do that," Elena screamed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "We're married. I'm your wife. I have rights." "You're a squatter, Elena," I replied coldly. "And you have exactly 30 minutes to gather your sons and your belongings and vacate my building. If you're still on these premises at 1:00 p.m., I will have Sergeant Miller here trespass you. And since you've already gone to the trouble of filing a restraining order against me, I'm sure you'll understand why I cannot possibly allow you to remain in my immediate vicinity." The irony was a beautiful, jagged thing. By filing that order to keep me out of my own home, she had created a legal paradox that she couldn't escape. We could not both inhabit the same structure. And since I had proven I was the owner and the essential operator whose presence was required for the legal management of all 12 units, the law dictated that she was the one who had to go. "Leo," I said, looking at the younger son who was standing several paces behind his mother. He looked as though a massive weight had been lifted from his chest. "Your lease for apartment 3A is still perfectly valid. I signed a confirmation this morning. You have a home here if you want it. But your mother and your brother are finished." Julian, realizing his life of leisure was vanishing, lunged at me with a roar of rage. "You old snake. I'll kill you for this." Sergeant Miller didn't hesitate. He stepped in, grabbed Julian's arm, and spun him around with practiced ease, slamming him against the cold brick wall of the porch. "That's enough. You want to spend your first night of homelessness in a county cell? Because that's where you're headed if you move again." Elena was slumped against the doorframe, her ivory robe, once a symbol of her victory, now looking like a tattered shroud. She looked at me, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw the real woman. The angel was gone. The victim was gone. She was just a broken gambler who had tried to bluff a man who owned the casino. "Arthur, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the idling police cars. "I have nowhere to go. My money. Marcus said he needed it for the tech merger investment. He said we'd be billionaires. His name is Vincent, Elena, and he's already gone. I had my security team track his cell phone signature using the building's guest Wi-Fi logs. He hopped a bus to Atlantic City 2 hours ago with $50,000 of your cash." She let out a low, guttural wailing sound and sank to her knees on the porch. I didn't feel the surge of joy I thought I would. I just felt a deep, hollow tiredness. I looked up at the windows of the building. My tenants were watching. Mrs. Gable was at her window, her hand over her mouth. Mr. Henderson was there, too, holding his violin bow. They finally saw the man who had been taking care of them all these years. 30 minutes, Elena," I said, turning toward the door. "I'll be waiting in the lobby. Don't make me call the professional movers to put your things on the sidewalk." I turned my back on her and walked into the lobby. I sat in the high-backed velvet chair near the fireplace, the one Clara and I had chosen together 30 years ago. I checked my watch. The clock was ticking, and for the first time in a long time, time was on my side. The 30 minutes felt like 30 years. I sat in the lobby chair, watching the grandfather clock in the corner swing its brass pendulum, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in a building that had suddenly gone cold. Upstairs, the sounds were chaotic. I heard the frantic scraping of furniture, the shrill, hysterical shouting of Julian, and the low, rhythmic sobbing of the woman I had thought was my soulmate. One by one, they descended. Julian came first, lugging 2 heavy suitcases and a gym bag. He stopped in front of my chair, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you've won, don't you? You're just a lonely old man in a suit. You'll die in this building all by yourself, and no one will care." I didn't look up from my watch. "I'd rather die alone in a house I built than live in a palace built on lies. Julian, your ride is waiting at the curb. I'll call the car for you. Consider it my final act of maintenance." He spat on the marble floor near my shoes and stormed out the door. A moment later, Leo appeared. He didn't have much, just a backpack and a small box of books. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes full of a complicated grief. "I'm moving my things to 3A, Leo said quietly. "If the offer still stands." "It stands, Leo," I replied, finally looking up. "You're a good man. You didn't choose your blood, but you chose your character today. If you need a job that doesn't involve running cons, come see me Monday morning. I need someone I can trust to handle the records." Leo nodded, a small, grateful smile touching his lips, and headed for the stairs. Finally, Elena emerged. She was no longer the radiant bride in ivory lace. She wore a simple tracksuit, her hair disheveled, her face puffy and red. She looked small. For a second, the old Arthur, the one who wanted to fix everything, felt a pang of sympathy. But then I remembered the basement. I remembered the $5,000 a month in alimony she had hidden while I paid for her groceries. I remembered the security footage of Vincent Scalise. She stopped in the center of the lobby. "Are you really going to do this, Arthur? After everything we shared?" "We shared nothing, Elena," I said, standing up. "I share my life. You shared a performance. You didn't marry me. You married a target. The problem is you didn't check to see if the target was armed." "I have nothing left," she whispered. "Vincent, he took the cash. He changed his number. I'm broke." "You aren't broke, Elena. You have over $400,000 in a Merrill Lynch account and a property in Oak Ridge that brings in steady income. You just don't have my $7 million. And you never will." I walked her to the door. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, Silas Thorne stepped forward with one final document. "Mrs. Vance," and I use that name because the marriage to Mr. Sterling is being annulled for fraud as of this afternoon. "Here is the formal notice of the lawsuit. Mr. Sterling is suing you for the return of all subsidized rent and charity payments made over the last 24 months, totaling $84,000. She didn't even fight it. She just took the papers, climbed into the waiting car, and vanished into the city traffic. But the day wasn't over. "Silas," I said, looking at the street. "Where's Scalise?" "He's at a motel near the bus station, Arthur. He's waiting for the midnight coach to Atlantic City. He thinks he's clean. Let's go." We arrived at the Seaview Motel an hour later. It was a dump, the kind of place where people go when they don't want to be found. I told the sergeant to wait in the car. I wanted this to be a private conversation. I knocked on room 12. When the door opened, Vincent Scalise stood there in a stained undershirt, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. He looked at me, then at my suit, and his eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "The IRS. "I'm Arthur Sterling," I said, stepping into the room without an invitation. "The man whose wife you've been sleeping with for the last year." Scalise laughed, a raspy, yellow-toothed sound. "Oh, the manager. Elena told me you were a pushover. Look, old man, she's yours again. I'm done with her. She's too much work." "I don't care about Elena," I said, sitting on the only chair in the room. "I care about my building. And I care about the $50,000 of her money you have in that duffel bag on the bed." Scalise's expression shifted instantly. He reached toward his waistband. "You better get out of here before you what, Vincent?" I asked calmly. before you add an assault charge to the 3 warrants you have out of Seattle? Or maybe you'd like to discuss the wire fraud and identity theft files my lawyer currently has sitting on the district attorney's desk? Scalise froze. He looked at Silas, who was standing in the doorway, holding a briefcase like a weapon. Here's the deal, I said. You're going to give me that bag. All 50,000. I'm going to return it to Elena's accounts. Not because I love her, but because I don't like thieves in my territory. In exchange, I might forget to hand over the GPS logs and the surveillance footage that places you at the scene of a dozen different fixer jobs in this city over the last year. Scalise looked at the bag, then at the door, then at me. He was a small-time crook. He knew when he was outclassed. He tossed the bag toward me. Take it. She was a lousy mark anyway, always crying about her boys. I took the bag and stood up. Get on the bus, Vincent. If I ever see you within 100 miles of Sterling Manor, you won't be going to Atlantic City. You'll be going to Cage. I walked out of that motel feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't about the money. It was about the order. I had spent my life building things that lasted: walls, foundations, reputations. People like Elena and Vincent were just rot. And sometimes you have to cut out the rot to save the structure. That evening, I returned to my apartment. Not the basement. My real home, apartment 1A. I walked through the rooms, looking at the furniture Clara and I had chosen. I sat on the balcony and looked out at the city lights. The silence wasn't a vacuum anymore. It was a victory. Leo came by later that night. He brought a pizza and 2 sodas. We sat on the balcony, the landlord and the tenant, and we didn't talk about the divorce or the lawsuits. We talked about the building. We talked about the new roof we needed for Building B and the way the roses in the courtyard were starting to bloom. You really are the manager, aren't you? Leo asked, taking a bite of his pizza. In a way, I said, looking at the stars. I spent so long trying to hide what I had built because I was afraid people would only see the money. But I realized today that the building isn't the money. The building is the responsibility. It's the people inside. It's the truth. The legal battle would take months. Elena would try to fight, then she would settle. The marriage would be erased as if it were a typo in a contract. But as I sat there, I realized I had received the greatest wedding gift of all. I had been reminded of who I was. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a lonely old man. I was Arthur Sterling. I was a builder, and my foundation was stronger than ever. As I closed my eyes that night, I didn't see Elena's face. I saw Clara's. I saw the 30 years of hard work and honesty. And I knew that from now on, I wouldn't hide my wealth. I wouldn't hide my heart. I would just be Arthur. And that was more than enough. 1 year. They say time heals all wounds, but in my experience, time is simply the master architect that allows you to look at the wreckage of your life and decide which bricks are worth salvaging. As the sun rose over the copper-tiled roofs of Sterling Manor Heights exactly 12 months after that cold morning in the basement, I stood on my balcony with a cup of black coffee and a sense of peace that no amount of money could ever purchase. The legal battle had been a marathon of paperwork and posturing. Patricia Valdez, Elena's shark of a lawyer, had tried every trick in the book. She had filed motions to stay the eviction. She had argued that the lease modification was signed under duress, and she had even attempted to claim that I had intentionally misled the court about my net worth. But Silas Thorne was a wall that no wave could break. We didn't just defend, we counterattacked. The turning point came during the discovery phase, when we produced the bank records showing Elena's secret $1 million hoard, and the surveillance footage of Vincent Scalise entering the building with his own key. The judge's face turned into a mask of pure ice. The annulment was granted on the grounds of essential fraud. In the eyes of the law, the marriage of Arthur and Elena Sterling never actually existed. It was a phantom, a glitch in the system that had been corrected. Elena was ordered to pay back the $84,000 in subsidized rent. To avoid a criminal trial for marriage fraud and filing a false police report regarding the restraining order, she signed a non-disclosure agreement and a permanent stay-away order. I heard she eventually moved to Florida, trying to restart her hunting career in a city where no one knew the name Sterling. I hope for her sake she find a way to be happy without a mark, but I suspect some people are only comfortable when they are playing a part. Julian followed her, of course. He never did find that tech job. Last I heard, he was working at a car wash in Miami, still complaining to anyone who would listen about the old man who stole his future. He still hasn't realized that I didn't steal his future. I simply stopped subsidizing his laziness. Leo, however, stayed. He is currently sitting in the office downstairs, managing the tenant records and overseeing the new maintenance crew. He didn't just take the job, he excelled at it. He has a way of talking to the tenants that reminds me of Clara, a genuine empathy that makes people feel heard. We spent the last 6 months renovating Building C together. He's learning the trade, from the plumbing to the profit and loss statements. He isn't my son by blood, but he is the heir to this building by merit. He proved that family isn't about whose name is on the birth certificate. It's about who stands by you when the basement walls are closing in. As for the $50,000 I took back from Vincent Scalise, I didn't give it back to Elena directly. I put into a trust fund for Leo's future children. I figured that money should finally do some good for a generation that won't use it to buy lies. Vincent Scalise, or Martin Kowalski, as the Seattle police called him, never made it to Atlantic City. The tip I gave the authorities led to his arrest at the bus terminal. It turns out he had more than just a duffel bag of cash. He had a laptop full of stolen identities. He's currently serving a 7-year sentence in a federal facility. I occasionally get letters from his lawyer asking for a character reference to help with his parole. I use those letters to start my fireplace in the winter. I took a walk through the courtyard this afternoon. The roses were in full bloom, vibrant, deep red petals that smelled of summer and resilience. I stopped at the fountain and looked at the plaque dedicated to Clara. For a long time, I thought I had betrayed her memory by letting Elena into our home. I thought I had been a fool. But as I stood there, watching the water dance in the light, I realized the truth. I wasn't a fool for wanting to love again. I was a man who believed in the best of people, and that is a wealth far greater than the $7 million sitting in my diversified portfolio. Elena didn't break me. She tested the foundation, and the foundation held. I'm 63 years old now. I still drive my 15-year-old truck, and I still wear my old work boots when I go down to check the boilers with Leo. The tenants know who I am now. They don't see the building manager or the landlord. They just see Arthur. They know if they have a problem, they can come to apartment 1A, and they know the man inside will listen. I hid my wealth because I wanted to find someone who loved me for my soul. In the end, I found something better. I found that I loved myself enough to protect what I had built. I found that a man's value isn't measured by the size of the complex he owns, but by the peace he feels when he closes the front door at night. My name is Arthur Sterling. I am a builder, a husband to a memory, a mentor to a young man who needed a chance, and the sovereign of a small brick kingdom called Sterling Manor. The mask is gone, the truth is out, and for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. To those of you listening, remember this. People will always show you who they are. Don't be afraid to look, and never, ever apologize for protecting the house you spent a lifetime building.